Okay. Greetings, everybody. My name is Randall Floyd from Indiana University. I'm also representing the Samvera community as the Hyrax co-technical lead, a distinction I share with another Indiana University colleague, Daniel Pierce. So what I'm sharing today is not so much like a showcase, showing something, a product of something, or a result of something in the kind of the spirit of what a lot of you all are sharing this week. It's more, it seemed like a good opportunity and a good audience for sharing a emerging conversation that we're starting to have, that I think we're going to have coming up in the next year, especially in Samvera community, as relates to the way that Hyrax has historically always used Fedora and the way that it currently uses Fedora, and some opportunities for maybe re-architecting and reconsidering how we use Hyrax, or at least to give more options as to how we use Hyrax. So this came out of
Sorry, Randall. I don't want to interrupt. Your screen share is also mirroring your like the Zoom window is all there, and so we have two of you. Like you can see
oh,
your.
I don't know how to rectify that. Um, Not sure what you mean exactly.
Randall, I think the best thing if you click the leftmost to minimize that as much as
There you
possible
go.
and kind of move
That,
that up to the corner, that deals with it.
If you,
yeah,
yeah,
those
that's
things
perfect.
that you can't see as presenter, right? Sorry about that.
That all good. Go
Uh,
ahead. Sorry.
that's all right. And if I'm talking really fast, it's because I've had a hard time getting this thing in under my time slot as I've tried to go through it. So anyway, this came out of conversations in early October. That was a meeting convened among Samvera and Fedora team members to help everybody on both sides understand just exactly how it is that Hyrax uses Fedora in the kind of in the weeds, the details, and that turned to issues talking about performance, which has always been a conversation. And it was the usual suspects among us, the Samvera core team and the Fedora core team. And Notchade, if people in this audience don't know who that is, they're a very strong service provider and contract developer Samvera space. And point that out to, I want to credit Nick specifically from Notch8 because he led us into a discussion that has surfaced many times in our history, that because being a newer face in the spheres things, I think he was able to point out some obvious things, that maybe some things that we had stopped talking about over time. It led to a discussion, about dealing and managing this real and or perceived performance disparity in Hyrax on Fedora, whether you're talking about disparity in performance between our supported configurations of Hyrax on a database versus Fedora, or even the way that performance disparity between what we experience and what other non-Hyrax, non-Samvera users experience with Fedora. So first, I have to give a very, very brief history lesson. Fortunately, Julie and between Julie and Chris, there was a lot that was talked about there that I don't have to cover. But I am flashing this screen to show that performance has always been a pain point for us, going all the way back to pre-Hyrax when we were Hydra and the early days of it produced lots of people trying to do things like this to get Fedora kind of out of the way of the direct line of fire and the direct interaction within the application, and try to get it downstream a little bit by like piecing other things in and around Fedora and the way that Hyrax interacts with Fedora, and like sidecar triple stores like Blaze Graph, things that were more performant. And that is eventually what gave rise to what is now known as, whoops, sorry about that, I'm missing that gave rise to Valkyrie, that fortunately Julie talked about. I don't have to go as much into, which is the way that we currently are configurable storage adapter layer that allows us to use different storage options. Originally, mostly that was to give people the option to get away from Fedora 4 and use, say, Postgres database natively. So as a segue, that to bring that to where we currently are, we currently have two supported strong viable configurations using the thing that we call Valkyrie, it makes a distinction in storage adapters so that you can mix up with different strategies. So like it makes a distinction between a storage adapter and a metadata adapter, but in its kind of most performance simplest form, if you're doing Hyrax on Valkyrie with, say, Postgres, it looks probably something like this. Your metadata adapter is Postgres, and you're probably doing something very POSIX-like for your storage adapter. Be it we have a easy to configure version disk option, or the easy to configure an S3 option. If you're choosing to do Fedora 6, that's most people that are choosing to do that deliberately are probably using Fedora 6 as both the storage and the metadata adapter. And of course, Fedora 6 could be handling the storage on top of S3, but you're still going through the Fedora API to get there. So fortunately, because of Julie's great conversation about Valkyrization, I don't have to go too much more into that, except just to say that Valkyrie is the data configurable adapter layer that Hyrax now uses to talk to either of its storage options. So that always leads to this question then of, well, which configuration should I choose? Why would I choose one of these over the other? And that inevitably goes back to a slightly awkward conversation to manage, which is about performance. Because obviously this is going to be a very, very performant option, and maybe you're downstream from your preservation layer and you don't have to worry about the fact that you're not really getting complete and total preservation promise if you go with something like a very performant raw database with just disk or S3 for media digital objects. On the flip side of that, if you're using Fedora 6 under Hyrax, even if you're just treating it like a black box, because Fedora 6 is a true preservation platform, you're getting preservation built in. And so this immediately sets up a question of you're having to explain to people that one is really good at performance and the other gives you a true preservation repository. But obviously, logically, one of those is going to be more performant than the other. Now, I always try to take the opportunity to plug, and just am so grateful to the Fedora community and the great response over the years of getting out of the Fedora 4 performance woes when it was built on ModeShape. And I think it's extremely performant. It's very performant, but using it the way that we do in Hyrax, it's obviously going to be less performant in that context, and because it just has a lot more to do. It's a RESTful API over HTTP compared to, say, a straight up database message-based protocol. It's dynamically offering native linked data support, versioning, it's having to shred that down into transparent persistence via OCFL, authorization. It just has a lot more to do. It makes more sense that it would be slightly less performant. Fedora Hyrax itself, if you're doing this, has a lot more to do than if you're just doing the database option. It has to speak linked data, it's walking graphs, it's mapping predicates, it's doing a lot more to make sense of that preservation repository that it sees on the other end. And so we end up in this slightly awkward then conversation of, well, so you're saying that we have to choose then between performance and preservation? And the answer is, unfortunately, yes, right now, because we have always been treating these two things as the same kind of thing. Application persistence being that fast, immediate, raw, interactive thing that drives the Hyrax application, versus a preservation persistence, which is, persist things in a way that gives you preservation promises and conforms to a preservation repository platform. So we've been treating those as if they're the same thing, but the problem is one is an apple, one is an orange, and those are never going to equal the same thing. Or to maybe put a little more finer point on it, we're using Fedora probably wrong, and we always have been, hence the performance woes. So again, to credit Nick from Notch 8, pointing out the obvious of conversations that have gone by the wayside over time is, well, why do you have to choose? Why not performance plus preservation? Why can't you have both? Why can't you have an apple and an orange? Why can't you have something that looks a little bit more like this, where you have application persistence, which is very performant and drives the functionality of the application, but then downstream somewhere you have true preservation persistence, and you have the ability to populate preservation persistence, probably needs to be asynchronously so that it's not in the way of the application. And for people who have been in the community a long time and remember these conversations from the past, and you're groaning slightly and saying, well, we've been down all these roads before. In fact, isn't that how we got to Valkyrie? And, kind of, here we are talking about it again. The problem is that Hyrax or Samvera as a solution bundle has never owned that. It's never offered that as a thing, something that you can just get if you out of box, if you configure it that way. And that's what we're talking about. That's what we're trying to revisit. That's what we want to try to work on and offer. And as it just so happens, I think we're in an opportunity to do so that we weren't in before, because we didn't have the right pieces. So now we have the Valkyrie adapter storage layer, and so it just kind of intuitively comes to mind and makes sense that, well, now you know how to talk to Postgres, you know how to talk to Fedora 6 via the Valkyrie metadata adapter. So why can't you just have some event-driven services as kind of like a preservation component wrapped under the umbrella of what we might call like a preservation adapter that can populate and keep in sync your downstream preservation persistence via the same kind of adapters that you would use if you were just doing Fedora 6 just straight up in Hyrax. And then we have something else we didn't have before. We have transparent back in the Fedora backend, so that you could even conceive of like adding a tool set that lives in companion with these preservation adapter and services, so that you could directly like make sense of the OCFL store itself if you wanted to do something at a much lower level than the Valkyrie adapters using Rails or Ruby code. So I want to be sure and also say that to not anybody who's a Hyrax adopter to not panic and thinking, okay, we're forcing yet more change on you. Because when Nick from Notch 8 put this out into a conversation in Slack, there was the immediate kind of, well, this is yet more kind of churn and change, and we have already just gotten out of or are about to get out of the Hyrax cul-de-sac that we've been in. We chose to do this. We're almost there, or we are there. We're using Valkyrie on Fedora 6, and we got there through lots of this. And now you're saying that, well, we're going to re-architect it slightly again to where it really is supposed to look like this, to where you have to figure out now how to wedge in your Postgres database, and you're going to have more pain like this. But I want to be sure to say that that's not what we're saying at all. We're talking about an additional thing, and like an additional like layer and adapter that you could choose. And it makes sense that you would be able to stop at just Fedora 6, because to make it work ideally at all, you would use the existing Valkyrie and Fedora 6 adapters that we already have. So naturally, you would be able to just stop there if you wanted to. So to conclude, what we're looking at hopefully is the ability to support 3 distinct storage configurations. So like Hyrax using Valkyrie directly, just fast performant database, Hyrax on Valkyrie on Fedora 6, or a combination with the introduction of a preservation adapter that can take care of a preservation persistence and still have performant database driving the your application in the application persistence so that you can have an apple and an orange. For myself, I am concluding my year as the Hyrax co-tech lead, but I have a strong interest in this work, so I would definitely volunteer myself as being kind of the primary person investigator, but I would be leaning heavily on anybody that has an appetite for such a thing on either side of the Samvera or the Fedora community side, either side of those aisles to join me on that. And as we get traction, we'll be sure and communicate where and how you can follow that work. And with that, let's stop share.
Thank you, Randall. Thank you for that. That was definitely a very, intriguing proposal and concept. And I'd love to have this conversation more broadly and, bring some other brains into the chat. Any questions for Randall? Emily.
Hey, Randall.
Hello.
Thank you for explaining this. Like I've heard Sorry, I didn't know if you could hear me or not. Thank you for that context about this discussion. And I think I personally would like to learn a lot more about kind of what the use cases or functional requirements for a preservation adapter type thing would be. And if, anyway, I will just express my interest in hearing more about how this develops.
Great, thank you. And of course, I have zero answers for any details other than just kind of intuitively how something would evolve.
Yeah, but I just want to reiterate too, I think we continue to use Fedora and stick with Fedora and have been actively working to get all our data up into Fedora 6, mainly because of those preservation use cases and the functionality in that space that Fedora provides, and also this broader community that's also contributing those use cases. So just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
Julie, we'll take your quest. We'll take Julie's question, and then we'll flip over to Dan.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think this is really interesting to consider, and I'm actually intrigued by this for what IU is doing with Hyrax and Fedora as well. So I think and I don't know if Randall, if that's partially where you're thinking of things for this too, since we're both at IU. But yeah, I'm like, oh, that, thinking about this for an application and a preservation layer, like that could move us a lot farther along for the preservation work that we're trying to do as well. So
Yeah, the conversation was in response to community's expression of
yeah.
pain points, but you and I know very well the pain points on our own home turf.
Right. No. So I'm in too. Yeah.
All right. That's great. Thank you so much. And yeah, we will. It sounds like there's certainly interest in this room today, but I can envision that there is general interest in continuing that conversation or kind of hearing expanded thoughts on what that looks like. So we will keep everybody informed on that. So thank you.